Thank you for watching the Housing Oregon YouTube channel. Be sure to join our network and get involved in the work that we are doing. If you can, please like and subscribe. It helps us build this channel, which serves as a platform to communicate with our members. This video is part of our 2025 annual conference. We're looking for folks to be on the conference planning committee. Please email info@housingoregon.org.
We need to speak into the microphone a little bit more. All right. I'm getting the thumbs up from the back of the room, so thank you. My name is Kimberly Horner. I am the Executive Director for the Portland Community Reinvestment Initiatives. We go by the acronym PCRI. We are the largest Black-led affordable housing nonprofits in Northeast Portland, probably Portland in general, and maybe even in the state of Oregon. Today is a really exciting day for me because I have the opportunity to really introduce some dynamic people from my staff. We have staff that's sitting in the audience, so go ahead and raise your hands and put your cameras down so that they can see who you are, in addition to the two folks that are sitting up here with me today. Today's presentation is the beginning of something that's going to grow a little bit larger. I don't think that Andrew realizes that the work that he's putting in place is actually work that we are going to expand on. So surprise to you, and you'll see. And then over to my right is Andrea Debman. Andrea Debman has been with our organization for 13 years now. Andrea is the Director of Property Management and Resident Services. This is the person that knows all about LIHTC, all about leasing up, all about everything you ever wanted to know about affordable housing and how to lease up a property and how to do the property management side and resident services side. So thank you, Andrea, for being here today. And then we also have an intern, and that's Andrew Gewecke, which means?
We have no idea. We think it sounds funny.
Okay. He says happy candle.
Yeah, that's
so that's how we remember it. And at that, thank you for being here. And if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to raise your hand, stop Andrew, and he will be able to answer those questions with you. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea.
Well, that was such a beautiful introduction. I'm not sure what else needs to be said, but good afternoon. Thank you all for coming and being a part of this exciting and important conversation today. Hi. I'm really happy to be before you, very excited to introduce Andrew to lead us into this discussion about a very important topic in our community. And Andrew has joined our organization as an intern. PCRI has started an internship program. He has been able to come in and help the organization with some pretty high-level projects and just has jumped right in to support the work of this organization. So I'm really excited for him to have the opportunity to talk about and present to you today. I also want to just say, if there's ever any interest or you have folks that are interested in being a part of our internship program, I welcome the opportunity to talk to you more. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and you take it away.
Okay, well, they're being way too nice to me, which I appreciate. They both outrank me by a lot, so I am really flattered and honored that they've trusted me with this kind of presentation here. It's really very exciting to be here, so thanks for all spending your time with us today. Nothing like being told that your work is even more important than you realize. That's good for the nerves. And it's definitely true. If anybody has questions or comments or anything throughout, I love a give and take. That's perfect. When Kimberly and Andrea asked me, they let me have some input on what we presented at this conference, and I picked something about people, because to me that is one of the most important aspects of everything we do in the affordable housing industry, both the people who work with us on a daily basis, the people we serve, and the people who were great advocates and politicians and people before us. So I've chosen to do something about who we name our buildings after, both in our organization and across the industry, because I think that is both a fun thread of continuity throughout Northeast Portland, but also a surprisingly nuanced window into what traits and virtues we consider important in this industry. So we already said all that, so I'm going to just skip that. So the neighborhoods of Northeast Portland, as everybody here knows, are filled with affordable housing sites that have unique ties to the people that we in the industry look up to. The people whom these buildings are named after are their advocates, their politicians, they're pillars of our local and national communities. These are names that many of the people in this room might have heard of before, but when I first heard of them, they helped me learn about truly crucial people in this city. Some of them were names I hadn't heard before, some of them were names I had, but they all led me down really interesting avenues of research. So I'd like to share what I've been looking at for the last couple weeks and months. Some of the buildings I'll be speaking about today are managed by PCRI, and some are managed by our peer organizations, but all of them are landmarks in our neighborhoods, and they all honor people of note. So I made this map to show how prevalent these names that we honor are. Thousands of people, we've all passed these buildings on our day-to-day lives. And I bet many of the people who don't work in the affordable housing industry have no idea what these names mean, even though they pass them on a daily basis. Or if they do know them, they probably don't know as much about them as they should. So I would like to speak of these names often, and that's why I've built my presentation around them. Names have a symbolic importance, in addition to many other things. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, for example, is a name that we're all familiar with, because it's the major north-south thoroughfare in Northeast Portland. It wasn't always called MLK Boulevard. It used to be called Union Avenue, but the name was changed in 1989 in honor of one of the most important names in civil rights. Nearly 1,000 streets around the world are named for Dr. King. This is not an uncommon phenomenon, but each one has a particular story behind it. In the case of Portland's MLK Boulevard, the name was adopted after significant popular organization. It took, a petition of 4,000 signatures to change the street name in 1987, as well as dedicated popular pressure on city leaders. And the name change ultimately came to stand as a testament not only to the man it honors, but to the grassroots power of the advocates that worked for it. One of the most important of these advocates was a man named Bernie Foster. He was instrumental in ultimately getting the name change implemented. Bernie Foster founded the Scanner in 1975, and the Scanner has for decades been one of the most important black publications in the Pacific Northwest. The Scanner acted as a vehicle for media support when the city was debating, actually, whether or not to adopt MLK Boulevard as a street name. It was actually a much more robust debate than I think many people realize, because naming streets after such a renowned figure on its face seems like a no-brainer, but there was pushback, and Bernie Foster was instrumental in marshaling the forces in defense of the name. Media publication during this debate was absolutely crucial, convincing the public and the government of the importance of honoring Dr. King with a name change was an essential step in actually altering the landscape of Northeast Portland and changing this from an abstract plan to honor a good man to a concrete thing that actually happened. Bernie Foster, as a publisher, was an invaluable ally for this process, and he has one of the qualities that many of the people we'll be discussing do, namely the ability to mobilize popular support for a worthy cause. He's similar in this way, actually, to another black newspaper publisher we'll be talking about later, Beatrice Morrow, which will become important in a couple slides. But Bernie Foster said it best himself, I'd like to say. He said, "Freedom doesn't come free. You've got to work for it and fight for it. You have to be vigilant and fight for the issues facing you on a constant basis. That's what my paper does." Before we go further, I want to give a brief outline on how names like MLK Boulevard are changed. It's hard to talk about who buildings are named after, or streets, or cities, or anything else, without immediately having the impulse to want a building named after you. I'm convinced this is a universal thing that happens to everyone I talk to about this, including me. But there are good reasons why each of the buildings we'll be talking about have the names that they do. And those reasons basically follow the pattern on this slide. The candidates for being honored with a building name are usually people who have put down deep roots in their community. They are characterized by their advocacy, their commitment to helping their neighbors, and their strength of character. These qualities motivate people to advocate for them, which brings me to step 2. You need broad-based interest to successfully honor someone with a name. Petitions, community organizing, and grassroots support are often crucial in convincing decision makers that a particular person deserves the honor of a building name. So we go from the individual to the collective community. But step 3 is actually where Bernie Foster was so important, because he was able to publicize the strong feelings of respect and admiration that people in Portland felt towards Dr. King. Because even with a strong group of advocates, it takes continued, dedicated pressure on lawmakers and community leaders. You need to navigate bureaucratic hurdles. You need sustained, actual advocation and an eloquent defense of why your chosen figure is a pillar of their community. That's how Union Avenue was renamed MLK Boulevard, with this combination of roots, interest, and implementation. So I just want to foreground that as kind of the abstract thing holding this together. I also briefly want to shout out a stellar person in PCRI's own history, because what else are we here to do than to plug the heroes of our own organization? Because she really is an amazing person. This is Maxine Fitzpatrick. Maxine does not have a building named after her, but she was PCRI's fearless leader and executive director before Kimberly for 25 years. Maxine began her career in housing working for the Michigan Housing Authority, but then she moved to become a force in Portland affordable housing. She pioneered the idea of a right to return for African Americans in Northeast Portland, and she emphasized the importance of neighborhood integrity and resisting gentrification. That's why she's such a guiding star for our organization, because those values still animate us. She also launched PCRI's Pathway 1000, which aims to increase homeownership in Northeast Portland, another central tenet of why we exist. Pathway 1000 is really a centerpiece of PCRI's work, and we owe a lot to Maxine for making sure it really got off the ground as a master plan. A portrait honoring Maxine actually hangs in the King and Parks building, so we do have that way of always recognizing her achievements, which I think is very fitting, and also, coincidentally, a segue to our next building, which is King and Parks. This is one of PCRI's largest housing establishments, and it is named after 2 people. It's actually named after the streets that intersect it, Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard and Rosa Parks Way. Each of these streets, and by extension the building, is named after one unbelievably famous hero of the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King Jr. needs absolutely no introduction, but I'm going to run through some of his greatest achievements anyway, because they are worth talking about, undeniably. He was the winner of the 1964 Nobel Peace Prize. He was also the leader of the Montgomery bus boycott, the 1965 march from Selma to Montgomery for black voting rights, and the 1968 sanitation workers' strike. This is somewhat less famous than the other 2 events I just mentioned, and sometimes it's glossed over in the histories, but I want to make sure to emphasize it, because it was one of the most important movements of, I think, the years where he was most active. It was also the place where the infamous civil rights slogan, "I am a man," was publicized, which has gone down in history as a central tenet of empowerment. He led many other civil rights actions, and his faith played an enormous role in his life. He was a pastor of the Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was his religious conviction that in large part helped animate his abiding commitment to nonviolence, which is one of the things he is most remembered and admired for. Dr. King was a passionate advocate for housing justice specifically. He was a passionate advocate for everything, but I want to emphasize housing justice because it was a crucial point in his platform. He spoke about this issue nationally. One of his best speeches on the issue actually came in Chicago, where he proclaimed that now is the time to get rid of the slums and ghettos of Chicago. Now is the time to make justice a reality all over this nation. Now is the time. Urgency was one of his key values. He was not one to put any issue on hold for any length of time, which is something we can all learn from. His economic platform is sometimes overlooked slightly, but I want to make sure to emphasize it here. Economic reform, economic equity, was one of his primary concerns throughout his life. Nowhere was this on better display than in his Poor People's Campaign, which only reached its full expression after his death. King was very clear about the goals of this campaign. He emphasized that this will be no mere one-day march in Washington, but a trek to the nation's capital by suffering and outraged citizens who will go to stay until some definite and positive action is taken to provide jobs and income for the poor. This campaign was crucial. It made housing justice, along with almost every other facet of employment and economic reform, take a position at the front of the national consciousness. In 1968, they developed an action around this plan, and one of King's chief allies, Ralph Abernathy, led an enormous demonstration in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign. Abernathy and his demonstrators erected a huge area of 3,000 tents that they called Resurrection City. There's the faith coming into play again, on the National Mall in 1968. One of the purposes of this demonstration was to make the ills of housing discrimination specifically tangible and palpable to the people in Washington, to make the downtrodden present rather than invisible, in tents, not apartments, not houses, nothing affordable, but tents. The demonstration lasted for 42 days and went down in the history books, and yet it's sometimes glossed over, so I wanted to make sure to emphasize it here, especially in a housing industry. Rosa Parks was another invaluable contributor to the civil rights movement. We all know that. She's most well known for providing the civil disobedience that sparked the Montgomery bus boycott, and this was an essential episode of her life. But she also embarked on a long career of political advocacy, both before and after the bus boycott, that isn't as widely discussed. She served as secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP for a full 10 years, including for, well, that was all before the bus boycott. She served as secretary of the She was the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the highest honor that the American government can present to a civilian. She also helped elect John Conyers, who was one of the most important black politicians of the 20th century. She, like Dr. King, was a proponent of nonviolence, saying that our nonviolent protest has proven to all that no intelligent, right-thinking person is satisfied with less than human rights that are enjoyed by all people. I want to especially highlight Rosa Parks' political service with John Conyers, because this was a topic I personally was not taught about at all in school. Parks worked on Conyers' staff for a full 20 years. From 1965 to 1988, she was a serious political operative, not just a symbol. John Conyers himself was a U.S. representative from Michigan from 1965 to 2017. He was one of the 13 founding members of the Congressional Black Caucus. He was a stalwart voice for progressive causes on Capitol Hill. And he holds the record as the 6th longest-serving congressperson ever, with more than 50 years in politics. Conyers and Parks both became basically star-studded figures when they were working together, often drawing large crowds of admirers, way more than any general elected official and their staff person would. Nelson Mandela even paid them tribute when the three advocates shared a stage together, which must have been just a remarkable event to be at. And when Parks passed away, Conyers made sure to eulogize her, saying that America lost a living legend, and I, along with countless others, lost a friend. So, Dr. King and Rosa Parks are both leaders of international stature, but the majority of buildings in Northeast Portland are actually named after local Portland community members. This is one thing that Portland has done extremely well. One thing I discovered during my research is that we have very, very strong local history. It's well documented, it's well publicized, it's treasured by the people who guard it and publicize it. We have a remarkable trend of honoring people who are grassroots organizers, who have really affected everything from the granular dynamics of their home neighborhoods all the way up to the operations as a state, of the state as a whole, often over the terms of decades of career work. So I'm going to go into a couple of these local advocates. John Conyers is not a local advocate, but Dr. Darrell Milner is. And the Dr. Darrell Milner building is a good place to start here, because Dr. Milner is a genuine thought leader about the black experience, not only in Portland, but in Oregon and California. He is a shining example of the ways in which academic research can double as advocacy. This is a crucial point, I think. He spent his career unearthing and publicizing stories of black citizens in the Western United States, doing pioneering work that other historians might not focus on enough themselves. One of his most important works traced the exploits of York, the only black member of Lewis and Clark's Corps of Discovery. This is a really wonderful case study, I think, of how academic work translates into our political and social lives in ways you might not really expect, especially if you're not an academic. The 1803 Fund, which is now one of the biggest avenues for philanthropy in Northeast Portland, is named after York, who participated in Lewis and Clark's Oregon expedition in 1803. Narrative is a crucial step in philanthropy. Being able to tell a compelling story about the population you're uplifting is absolutely essential for creating continual, broad-based support for community work. This kind of narrative building from the 1803 Fund and elsewhere would be impossible without Dr. Milner and other academics like him. Dr. Milner has also had a storied career over and above this. He was the chair of Black Studies at Portland State University from 1984 to 1995. And in addition to the expertise I've already mentioned, he's also an expert on black cinema, which seems kind of just a wonderful thing he threw in there. And he's had a robust career of public appearances and speaking engagements. He's absolutely a public intellectual. The building that bears his name, by the way, is managed by Community Development Partners and Self-Enhancement, Inc., both wonderful organizations in their own right. The Ronnie Herndon Building is a good place to go from that because it honors a firebrand and local political legend. Ron Herndon is a graduate of Reed College, and he is a well-known Portland activist with an abiding regard for his community. He's been described as an expert at confrontation and the most powerful activist in Northeast Portland. And this pretty much does him justice, in my opinion. One of his most famous moments came when he compelled Mayor Bud Clark to apologize for making racist remarks during his tenure in 1989. This required a public campaign and some really adept organizing on Mr. Herndon's part. Often a remark like the ones Bud Clark made would have gone by the wayside, but Herndon made sure it didn't. And this went a long way toward prioritizing norms of respect and civility in Oregon politics. Ron Herndon also co-founded the Portland chapter of the National Black United Front in 1978 in order to further the causes of school access and integration. And he also organized a boycott in 1982 of 4,000 black students to keep Harriet Tubman Middle School open. He was a master at the practical implementation of political ideals. He got things done. He and Dr. Milner would have been an excellent combo in any given room because Dr. Milner was a storied academic and Ron Herndon knew how to get stuff done on the ground. And this took enormous courage, political savvy, and charisma. And with these qualities, Ron Herndon is a genuine role model for those of us who hope to be political advocates. In 40 years, maybe that'll be me. The laugh is unfortunate. You have to believe in me. This is also, by the way, a building managed by Community Development Partners and Self-Enhancement, Inc. I also want to switch gears a little bit and talk about an absolutely essential pillar of Northeast Portland who has been crucial to the health of his community in a social and cultural context. And that is Paul Knowles. Paul Knowles is known around town as the mayor of Northeast Portland. This is an unofficial title, but it's a very important one. His barbershop and salon, Geneva's Sheer Perfection, which he named after his wife, because Paul Knowles is a good husband, was a spot for social enrichment in Portland for 30 years. Paul also ran several other establishments, including the Cotton Club, where he once hosted Sammy Davis Jr., which is, in my humble opinion, the coolest thing I've ever heard about anyone. And he owned an establishment called Geneva's Restaurant and Lounge, which is also named after his wife, because Paul is a good husband. Paul is at every event in Northeast Portland. He's always smiling, he's always generous of spirit, and he's known by all. It's easy to associate him mostly with joy and fun instead of politics. But I want to recognize that he also serves a crucial political purpose. He helps keep his community together. He helps cultivate places where people feel like they belong in Northeast Portland. He boosts people's spirits. He helps maintain their emotional and mental health. This is an absolutely essential type of work. And it's hard to do, and it's often overlooked. It takes a particular kind of person with inexhaustible energy, social grace. And Paul exemplifies these virtues. So he is also honored with the Paul and Geneva Knowles Building, which is managed by Community Development Partners and Self-Enhancement, Inc., because they've got a hat trick. So the housing in our neighborhoods also recognizes professional workers. We've got an academic so far, we've got a political activist, we've got a social connector, And now we have Matt Dishman, who is doubly important because he is honored twice with an affordable housing development, King Dishman Affordable Housing, and a community center, the Dishman Community Center. Pretty straightforward names. Dishman was one of the first African-American police officers in Vanport, Oregon, where many black families settled. Vanport was a hugely important hub of labor in Oregon during World War II, and it was an equally important hub of black settlement in the mid-20th century. Matt Dishman ultimately became the first black sheriff's deputy in Multnomah County, and he worked tirelessly to protect his peers during his whole career. He was a man of service. His work was important to him. He took it seriously, and the community he served was close to his heart. We've talked about academics, politics, and social connectors. Now we talk about hard work and service to one's neighbors. So it's very fitting that he's also honored among the luminaries of Northeast Portland. Alberta Simmons Plaza is named, unsurprisingly, after Alberta Simmons, who initially worked as a teacher's aide at King Elementary School in Northeast Portland. When Alberta retired, she became a well-known advocate for housing justice specifically, especially for seniors. Simmons co-founded the organization Housing Our Families, which became one of the earliest and most important providers of housing services in Northeast Portland. Housing Our Families actually helped build the Alberta Simmons Plaza, which was such a notable Portland landmark that Maya Angelou visited it on her tour of the city. Maya Angelou will come up again in a moment. Alberta Simmons personifies the absolute grit that successful advocacy in Portland especially, requires. I love this quote from her. This is my favorite thing she's ever said. "When I make up my mind, I will fight the devil in hell because I believe in my community." I don't think I could argue with that if I tried. I don't think I could ever think of something more forceful to say than that. Alberta Simmons is also especially worth mentioning because housing justice was at the absolute center of what she believed in and worked for. One of the most fascinating parts of this research for me was learning about how wide a variety of fields these role models had. Alberta Simmons advocated for housing. Ronnie Herndon advocated for education. Dr. King advocated for civil rights. One of the things that becomes absolutely clear when you start comparing the stories of these people is that these topics are profoundly interrelated. They all go together to make up a life lived in safety and dignity. And that, I think, is why the advocates of varying backgrounds are all honored in the same way, by having their names put on a building. That being said, I want to especially highlight Alberta Simmons. Because of her work with housing justice specifically, she is a remarkable role model for us specifically in this industry. Feels like home court advantage, and I want to publicize it. So this next item on the list isn't actually a housing development, but while the Tony Hobson Center for Self-Enhancement is not a housing development, its name does still honor a very important Portland advocate. Tony Hobson is the founder of Self-Enhancement, Inc., which now manages the building that bears his name. Over the course of his career, Hobson helped build up one of the largest providers of services in Northeast Portland ever organized. SEI is really varied in its services, as I'm sure a lot of you know. It provides after-school programs, community and family programs, and affordable housing support. This ties back well to the point I just made about the interconnectedness of different service areas. It takes work on multiple fronts to make lasting change in a person's quality of life. Hobson also changed the landscape of the Portland philanthropic scene when he joined with Rukeya Adams and Ron Herndon to help form the 1803 Fund, which I mentioned earlier. So Hobson is a role model not only for his community work, but for the way in which he's joined with other advocates in order to parlay his success into a lasting financial vehicle for long-term change in Northeast Portland. Definitely deserves a building. I want to jump back to PCRI buildings in order to highlight one of the most important people on this list, hands down, in my opinion. And that is Maya Angelou, who is immortalized in the Maya Angelou apartments. Maya Angelou is one of the most famous poets of the last 100 years, with a vibrant international career. She's probably one of the biggest names on this list. And yet she still came to visit Portland and made time to see the actual building named after her on her trip. She gave a speech dedicating the buildings, too, with a wonderful sentiment that I have here, and I'm going to read because I like it. "By naming this beautiful housing unit for me, I am honored. I'm grateful to be of use. Anyone who cannot be used is useless. That does not mean to be abused or misused or overused, But to be of use is to pay for your reason to be in the world. It's the responsibility for the time you take up and the space you occupy. That's to be of use. So you honor me. I'm delighted. These pretty little bungalows. I think bungalow is a compliment. I had to look it up. I hope it is. Anything Maya Angelou says about your apartment is I think, a compliment by default. But she makes an excellent, excellent point, because this can be said about every single person we've talked about today. They find a way to justify their space in the world and to use it for good. And I think Maya Angelou is a guiding light for all of the people we've talked about. She's not just a poet, though. She was also an essayist, activist, and critic with more than 50 honorary degrees. She was also, in fact, the first black woman to direct a film in Hollywood. She was a genuine polymath. She was also the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which makes 2 recipients, if anybody's counting, of the Presidential Medal of Freedom on our list, both her and Rosa Parks. Her talent and insight allowed her to rise to an unprecedented level of popular and cultural fame. And this made her visible on an international scale in a way that many of our other role models are not. This isn't a bad thing, but it is different, and we should note it. This was hugely important because it allowed her to advocate with such access and scope that it was almost impossible to ignore what she said or what she believed in. And what she believed in, compassion, education, the importance of lived experience, was absolutely worth listening to. She was the first black woman to be depicted on a quarter, which sounds trivial, primarily a symbolic honor, but it is hugely important because it helped make her one of the most recognizable figures in America. Angelou was also a professor with lifetime tenure at Wake Forest University, where she quickly gained adoration, unsurprisingly, among her students. After beginning her teaching career, she quickly took to calling herself a teacher who writes, rather than a writer who teaches. In this respect, she is a remarkable example of the power and importance of mentorship. And this is something we haven't quite touched on yet in this presentation, the importance of guiding young minds, of allowing space for discovery and disagreement, of translating thoughts and opinions into powerful manifestos for change. Maya Angelou typified all of these skills, and this is part of what we remember when we honor her with the names of our establishments. And I want to briefly touch, before I move on to another person, of what I think is one of the most inspiring things Maya Angelou said during her time as an educator. One of her favorite historical figures was a black Roman playwright from antiquity named Terence. Terence, in turn, had a remarkable quote: "I am human, and nothing human is alien to me." Angelou often talked about this quote in her classes. She interpreted it as a call to self-determination. If nothing human is alien to any of us, it is harder to separate ourselves from either the very good or the very bad people in this world. What they do, we could do in some possible future. Angelou believed that it is precisely because of our active choices and not because of our nature or our circumstances that defined our lives. Intention was her most important animating principle. And this is an important thing to remember because it's borne out in the biographies of the other people we've been talking about today. Intention was what made Dr. Daryl Milner or Rosa Parks or Alberta Simmons exceptional. Their hard work, their empathy, and their eagerness to serve others were all developed through their active choices. Maya Angelou made this idea explicit in her classes, and it helps give us a blueprint to follow the virtues of the people whom we have decided to honor. I think Maya Angelou would have gotten along with Beatrice Morrow, who was another crucial local hero, because Beatrice Morrow was also a polymath. She was a singer, a violinist, an activist, a publisher, a socialite, a lawyer who moved to Portland at the turn of the 20th century. She's most famous for being the editor of the Advocate, one of the most important black newspapers in the Pacific Northwest in its day. She helped lay the groundwork for the network of black publication infrastructure that Bernie Foster built off of when he founded the Scanner. And like Bernie Foster, Beatrice Morrow became an absolutely essential voice for black Portlanders. She was also the first black woman to graduate from law school in Oregon, and the first black woman to practice law in Oregon. She was not, interestingly enough, the first black woman to pass the bar in Oregon because she ended up failing the bar and practicing law anyway, which is either a minor transgression or an inspiring moment of self-determination. And I choose to think it's the latter because that's more fun. And she was hugely important, so we'll give her a pass. But Beatrice Morrow was also the co-founder of the Portland chapter of the NAACP. She was extremely involved in local advocacy, like Rosa Parks, and the NAACP was her organizational avenue for that advocacy. But her home also became a well-known salon of social connection. She became well-known in Portland for hosting interracial teas that brought together prominent artistic, political, social leaders from around the country to dine together and exchange ideas in her house. This was a self-conscious breaking of the color line. And it was radical, and it was a hugely successful program that she continued for many years. It was long-standing, and it was criticized, but she continued to do it. Among the people she publicized in the Advocate, in addition to these teas, were black professionals when they visited Portland, so that her own community would be able to see and support these luminous people. These were people like Roland Hayes, who was one of the most famous black singers of the 20th century, and Oscar DePriest, one of the most important black politicians of his time. One of the most interesting things about research like this, I realized as I was doing it, is that the names all connect to each other. When you begin to talk about someone like Beatrice Morrow, you by definition talk about the people that she promoted, that she publicized. If you have, maybe you've heard the name Beatrice Morrow, but I certainly hadn't heard the name Oscar DePriest. He's a whole other tangent of history, and he's not necessarily local to Portland, so I haven't included him. But this is part of the reason why people is always what I focus on when I do presentations like this. Beatrice Morrow extended her community engagement to the national level in 1927 because she represented Oregon then at the 4th Annual Pan-African Congress in New York City, where she got to share her convictions that she had been developing for years as an editor with a much wider audience. The Honorable Charlotte B. Rutherford, on the other hand, was a prominent black judge in Oregon, and she classes Beatrice Morrow among the most important figures in Oregon history. She said that when the white papers were never saying anything good about black people, her, meaning Morrow's, publication provided an avenue that rounded out the picture. Morrow is also a particularly apt choice to be honored with a housing development, specifically because she was extremely concerned with publicizing the building of wealth and homeownership in black communities. Rutherford says it best, again, she highlighted business and homeownership all the time, providing information, showing progress, if you will, that black people were making was one of her primary motives. Beatrice Morrow used the Advocate as a hugely important vehicle for these efforts, once again proving the essential ability of the black press to amplify positive narratives. Morrow herself considered this amplification to be one of the most important duties of a publisher. When a fellow boosts his own town, she said, he does not stop there. He is performing an act that improves his own condition, or more aptly, her own condition. Community solidarity and individual advancement were absolutely linked for Morrow. Charlotte B. Rutherford was actually honored herself by having a housing development named after her, too. Charlotte B. Rutherford Place, located in the Arbor Lodge neighborhood, is run by Central City Concern and provides crucial housing for the area. And the honor is well-deserved in Rutherford's case. She had a long and impressive career as an administrative judge in Oregon, but was also known for her work as a civil rights attorney and a tireless advocate. One of her most remarkable achievements is that she worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for 7 years. In this role, she probably took her cue from her parents, pictured here, because they were both fervent members of the Portland chapter of the NAACP. Otto Rutherford, her father, was president of the Portland chapter in the 50s, and Verdell Burdine, her mother, was secretary of the branch for 20 years. They were both instrumental in helping pass the 1953 Oregon Civil Rights Bill, which was absolutely landmark legislation at a local and state level, and Rutherford has said that they were huge influences on her as she developed as an advocate in Portland. Margaret Carter Plaza, this is a PCRI building, is named after a woman who I think is one of the most fascinating people I'm going to talk about today, hands down. Carter was the first black woman to be elected to the Oregon State Legislature. We're going local again. She served in both major houses of government. She was an Oregon State Representative from 1985 to 1999, and she was an Oregon State Senator from 2001 to 2009. She also, and this is one of her greatest achievements, I would say, served as Oregon State Senate President from 2005 to 2009. So not only was she an effective politician, She rose to a leadership position in her chosen field. She made a lasting impression on the governmental bodies of the state. She was a champion of crucial causes while she was a public servant. She passed legislation that helped end Oregon investments in South Africa during apartheid, which connected Oregon government to an international stage in a remarkable and important way. She also propelled bills forward in the legislature that helped recognize Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday as a state holiday. In this way, I want to point out, she demonstrates how to continue the cycle of recognition that we as housing developers get to participate in. We recognized her by naming a building after her, but one of the ways she became an important enough figure to deserve that honor was by identifying other crucial role models that her peers should pay attention to. It's possible to track, in a really interesting way, I think, the web of community support, of mentors and role models and aspiring advocates through these honors. Practicing advocates honor established leaders in the field, and then the advocates after them, sometimes, honor them. Kimberly might have a building named after her at some point. I'll try. Margaret Carter is also interesting because though she served for most of her career as a Democrat, she was initially propelled into office by a group of Republican organizers. This was fascinating. Her backers in this case saw a chance to gain Republican support in their district, and their effort was successful. She was elected and had a distinguished political career. But this kind of maneuver also shows how nuanced political maneuvers often are. Margaret Carter was concerned with reforming education, with championing Black history, with taking a stand on international issues that required courage and compassion. She was able to cultivate allies among both Republicans and Democrats. In doing so, she provided a remarkable example to live up to of a government figure truly interested in serving the whole population. This doubtless helped her become an effective Senate president, and it reminds us that bridge building is an absolutely essential part of the advocacy we seek to practice and honor. Lydia Roy, to me, really personifies the importance of deep community roots. That was step one on our naming a place checklist, if anybody remembers. She committed to everything she did with her whole being. When she decided to work in education at Boise Eliot School, she ended up going on to teach for 27 years. When she became a member of her congregation at First Methodist Church, she was an active participant in her church, not just a passive observer. When she pursued her education, she got a master's degree from Oregon State University. When she launched into her social engagements, she became a Golden Life member of Delta Sigma Theta. She gave a lot of herself when she got involved with something. Commitment was her watchword. And this is something to emulate, I think, as an advocate. It's why she has Lydia Roy Gardens named after her. Nothing can be accomplished without determination and a deep, abiding willingness to stick to your team and your mission, even when things get difficult. PCRI has done a good job of teaching me the importance of this determination. Everyone I've met in the industry has. I think this is something that our peers know how to value. And thank goodness we do, because it couldn't be more important. It's important every day. I'm going to wrap up with Kafori Court, which is PCRI's newest building. The construction's been going on for months now, and it's been remarkable to see it develop over time. It's named after one of the most striking characters, I think, in Oregon politics, namely Gretchen Kafori. Gretchen Kafori wore many hats. She was an Oregon State representative from 1985 to 1991, but she was also a Portland City Commissioner from 1991 to 1998. She is particularly distinguished in this way because she got experience in the thick of local and state politics, and that gave her an appropriate vantage point from which to become a remarkably dynamic public servant. She was also deeply concerned with social issues, especially issues of gender equality. She co-founded the Oregon chapter of the National Organization for Women, and like several other people I've discussed today, she was acutely aware of the need to pass on her knowledge to further generations. So she pursued this goal as an instructor at Portland State University for almost 10 years. But Gretchen Kafori is best known in the lore of the housing development world, I learned, for helping to found PCRI, which is fantastically convenient for me as a presenter. This is, I think, the best thing I could possibly think of when I'm looking at building names. PCRI's origin story is, I think, a lot more dramatic than one might expect, in ways that I really admire. PCRI was founded when the city of Portland successfully broke up the firm Dominion Capital. Dominion Capital was a financial firm that specialized in home loans. They would buy up large quantities of property in northeast Portland. They would give loans to residents at inflated prices. They would foreclose on the homes at a moment's notice. They would undermine property values. And they'd generally do everything possible to depress the real estate markets and community fabric of the neighborhoods in which people owned property. This created a vicious cycle because when home values dropped, it became harder and harder for northeast Portland residents to partner with other banks and financial institutions to get their loans. So as real estate markets shrunk, Dominion Capital was able to solidify their hold on the neighborhood until it became increasingly difficult for northeast Portland residents to successfully build wealth. I studied economics in undergrad, and this was like catnip to me. This was the most interesting part of everything. My economics brain was going 90 miles an hour. But in what I would call an unusual moment of government dynamism, the city of Portland actually stepped in when they saw this happening. Gretchen Kafori and her aide, Eric Sten, led a public attack on Dominion Capital that succeeded wholeheartedly. Dominion went bankrupt. Its principal lenders, Jeffrey Edmonds and Cyril T. Worm, which is an unfortunate name, filed for bankruptcy. They were indicted for fraud, and they left the state in disgrace. The only problem was no one knew what to do with the vast quantities of real estate that Dominion Capital had left behind. PCRI was created to receive this real estate. Through a joint effort of government officials, Dominion's holdings were incorporated into a new nonprofit. That's us. And, the rest is history. And then we went on to a long and happy life. But this is why it's especially fitting that we chose Gretchen Kafori as a role model to honor with a building name. She is a particularly beloved part of our history, and her political courage and activism is a virtue worth emulating. And so I want to close by saying there's a remarkable range of reasons to appreciate our housing role models. I've covered a lot of ground here, a lot of history, a lot of different areas of human activity, and local, state, and national figures. You guys have listened very patiently. I appreciate that. If I was a third grade teacher, I would envy if my kids ever did anything. But the common thread uniting the way I think about these topics is that we use our buildings as a shorthand for our values. We honor people who inspire us, whose ethics and commitments we hope will guide our own work and the work of those around us. This is an easy point to dismiss as superficial or decorative, who the building's named after, but I'd argue it's quite central to who we are as an industry. The reason this topic attracted me is because you can tell a lot about people by who they choose to celebrate. Often this is the clearest window into their genuine convictions. We value academic inquiry. We value political activism. We value community organization. We value public service and grit in the face of long odds and continued commitment in the face of years of struggle. We value using national and international fame as a platform to amplify local issues. We value putting in the work with your local organizations, even if you don't get recognized for years. And we value above everything else the hope and character required to make people's lives better in the world of housing and outside of it. Now, before I conclude, Kimberly, you wanted to talk about Kafori Court, right? I'm going to hand it off. She outranks me.
Thank you. What a riveting speech. That was so wonderful. Now you can see why I wake up and are able to do the work that I do on a daily basis because of the wonderful staff, the brilliant staff that we have at PCRI. Take a bow. That was great. So a little bit about Andrew. Andrew is going to go on to law school, as you can see. He's very eloquent in his speech, very dynamic speaker, did a lot of research, put a lot of time and effort into putting this presentation together, so thank you so much. That was wonderful. I also want to recognize some other faces in the room that when you talk about a common thread, Kate Allen, sitting to the back of the room, is also that common thread. A very, very dear friend of the organization. She helped Maxine Fitzpatrick in a lot of different ways, including helping author our Pathway 1000, which is a document and a strategic plan to build 1,000 units in a 10-year time span. 200 of those units will be for rental, and the other 800 home ownership. So thank you, Kate, for doing that and being such a friend and a important piece of our organization as well. Another little nugget of information about Andrew. He's also a jazz musician. He's a jazz musician, he's an actor, and he is that person that came into our organization and comes with a lot of very good ideas, executes them well, and we really appreciate the hard work that you've put into this presentation. Another little thing that we haven't told you is we plan to expand on this. So we have some very sophisticated people in our organization that are writing grants so that we can continue this dialogue and this documentation of these very important people. And we'll hope that you can help us continue in that way. So thank you ahead of time. One thing that I did want to mention, Kafori Court is having its grand opening on October 24th. It is 40 units of permanent supportive housing where we are housing Black seniors that are on the verge of homelessness. We honor and protect that resident, especially our organization, because that population is very near and dear to our hearts, and we cannot leave folks behind that have been very instrumental in making sure that Black Portland stays relevant and alive in this community and in this day and age. So thank you for being here. We appreciate all of the efforts that people go through just to show up to these kind of functions. I am Vice Chair of Housing Oregon, and we appreciate you for being here. Before we conclude, though, are there additional names that we should add to Andrew's presentation as we grow it bigly and put it on the road? Does anyone have any specific names that we should be adding to the presentation?
And this could be, we want to hear about people you work with, people you admire, people who show you how to do your job in a way you appreciate, people who you look up to. It doesn't have to be someone famous. It just has to be someone who's made an impact on you,
Yep.
I think.
Or going back to your very first slide that talks about the 3 qualities. Or any names that we've skipped that you think we should have added.
Some still exist and some don't exist that have been historical. Am I not loud enough? Okay, great. That have been a contribution to civil rights in Portland, and especially the ones that don't exist. I think it would be cool for all organizations. I work for Central City Concern, so ourselves and other organizations, it would be great for all of us to acknowledge, especially ones that no longer exist, to uphold those churches who contributed to the civil rights of our North and Northeast Portlanders, Black Portlanders, so we can make sure not to forget those.
We couldn't agree with you more. In fact, one name that comes in mind in particular is Dr. Bethel. He's passed away about 5 years ago now. He was the chair of the board for PCRI for many years, and he was a very strong advocate in our community for housing and just for people and human rights in general. He was also a pastor. And so I think that is one of the areas where we definitely want to make sure that we recognize that too. Pastor Haynes is another good name that we could add to that. Not only is Pastor Haynes another person that's on our board of directors, but Pastor Haynes really has an interesting history as well. And he was very active in the Black Panthers and was very active in getting the Black Panthers activated in Portland many, many years ago. One person that we will be honoring, in addition to Gretchen Kafori, is Ernest Warren. Ernest Warren is an attorney. He is that person that was very instrumental in making sure that Dominion Capital, as you heard in Andrew's presentation, he sued for 350 different homes to get pulled back into the portfolio. So he fought for every single one of those homes that we currently have in our portfolio so that they would not be lost to foreclosure. Ernest Warren has been a champion of the organization and still acts as our general counsel all these years. So thank you. Any last words? Anything from you want to close us out, Andrea?
Wow, that was really incredible. Good job, Andrew. I just think this is a really exciting conversation, and I hope we have plenty more opportunities to talk about it. I certainly hope we would love to see you all at our ribbon cutting on October 24th for Kafori Court. This has been a labor of love, and so this is really exciting for our organization to be at this point. And so we hope you can come out and celebrate with us. But thank you for being here today, and thank you for listening to this wonderful conversation.
Thank you.